And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Yes, we're back. Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown. CP joining me as always. CP Christian Page. How we doing, man?
I'm doing awesome. Happy Friday.
Oh, yeah. Happy Friday. We got cold beers flowing. We've got NFL draft stuff on tap as well, and we're going to get into all that from the Clemson LSU game to some recent players that have declared. We've got 2 big names that we want to talk about out of the University of Alabama on tonight's show. Before we get into all of that, I need to let everybody know that you need to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on YouTube, Spreaker.com, pretty much anywhere you listen to a podcast. Cover One Draft Podcast is there. So search Cover One Draft Podcast, NFL Draft Podcast, and you will find it. And all you got to do is rate, review, subscribe. And the more ratings we get, the more reviews we get, the more subscriptions we get, the more episodes we'll be able to do for everybody. And trust me, you don't want to miss what we provide during draft season because, I'm talking about interviews with some of the best players in the draft, like last year, Charles Amenu out of the University of Texas, had an opportunity to talk with him on the show. We've had really well-known analysts on the show from, Danny Kelly of The Ringer to Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon to all over the place. We've got tons of content coming, especially now that it's full-on draft season. We've got playoff football this weekend, which we won't really talk about. But like I mentioned, we will talk Clemson LSU later. But let's start with some of the recent news, the big news out of the University of Alabama, and that is Tua. He declared for the draft on Monday, and then wide receiver Jeudy and wide receiver Henry Ruggs have also declared for the 2020 NFL Draft. So we get a trio of offensive playmakers out of Alabama entering the draft. So we can start with whichever player you want to start with, but what was your take out of these declarations for the draft?
Despite popular belief, I feel like all 3 were definites, in my opinion. We talked about the Tua declaration a week ago at this time, talking about, is there a chance that he returns to school? Of course there was a chance, but I think it was just a formality that he had a press conference setting to just kind of praise his time at Alabama, to, kind of pay honor to Nick Saban and the crew and his brother, of course. But it wasn't all that surprising. I think there were more major red flags returning to Alabama than there were going pro. Go get your money, man. You deserve it. You don't owe Alabama or college football anything else. You've had your time to shine there. So I don't think I don't want to say it's necessarily the right decision. I don't feel comfortable. I think that just depends on your perspective, especially from Tua's perspective. But
Right.
I think he made the smart decision based on what he can get now. And even if he doesn't play in the 2020 NFL season, you're in the right rehabilitation mindset where they will rehab you to get to a starting caliber level. They will not rush you in the sense, depending on draft position. So I still think, if his medicals come clear, I don't see him participating in the February combine, but from an interview perspective, he will. But if he clears medicals, then I still think top 10 is very well in the question, maybe even a little higher than that. Just depends on what's to come down the injury timeline from here on until then. As far as the other guys, again, Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, in my opinion. I think Ruggs is a little more raw in some areas. I think he's still kind of learning the nuances of the receiver position. Jeudy has him beat as far as route running goes. Judy's one of the best route runners I've ever scouted. But Ruggs, I think, just has a little more maybe natural athleticism, if that's a thing, if I can say that. But just Ruggs' overall body control, his just awareness when the ball's in the air. I had boots on the ground for the Iron Bowl, and just watching Ruggs on comeback routes and back shoulder throws, he just had that kind of camaraderie that rapport with Mac Jones starting his first game against Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium. But I definitely liked what I saw from Ruggs. I think he can maybe be used more as a chess piece, in the sense I think he could be really fun just based on matchups to line him all the way across the field. But Jeudy, I think he's more of the safer. I think his floor is a little higher. I think he's the safer of the two. Reliable pass catcher, though he did deal with some concentration drops this year. His route running ability, his ability to really kill any defense from any part of the field. I know sometimes that's used too often in some receivers, talking about just winning, whether it's on bubble screens and following your blocks with the vision he has with the ball in his hands, or just, attacking the middle area of the field, but making one move. I mean, when it's one-on-one coverage, I don't care what kind of route is made pre-play, just send him on the go route, because he'll make one move and he's going. I mean, you saw the first play of the Michigan game.
Oh, yeah.
If you get that kind of matchup on the outside with Jeudy, you go to him every time. So I think he has that game-changing ability. But I don't say it's splitting hairs. I think Judy's the more polished guy. But if you're just looking for possibly a higher ceiling, I think you look at his teammate Ruggs. But still, two very safe players, in my opinion, going forward. I think all three guys are top 15 picks.
I'm with you. You hit the nail on the head on all three players. I do want to start with Tua real fast. And he's ninth player ranked on my board currently. And the talent is there for him to be probably a top 3, top 4 player on the board. And if he was not injured, he probably would be in that top 4. Maybe he'd be a point or two behind Derek Brown, or maybe a point or two ahead Derek Brown. But because of the injuries, and like we've mentioned, it's a hip injury. It's a big injury to overcome. Lower body ailment injuries are ones that tend to reoccur. Not so much the hip, that could reoccur, but the ankle sprains, knees, all that stuff will come back and bite you. And I think it lowers the longevity of his career, almost similar to like an RG3 in the sense of, RG3, he started getting those lower body injuries. And granted, they were at the wrong time, but they kind of hurt the longevity of his career as an NFL starter. I know he's on the Ravens. I know he's got a playoff game coming up this weekend. I know all of that, but Tua as a starter, rather than having let's say a Joe Burrow 15-year career, which I think it should be expected with Joe Burrow, Tua, I think it's more of like maybe 8 to 10 or maybe 12. And I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, that's very good, especially considering the circumstances. But I think that should go into account when evaluating him and really ranking him on your big board and in your quarterback rankings. But realistically, while yes, he's 9th on my board, I do think he's a top 5 pick, certainly a top 10 pick, just because, even if nobody trades up and nobody trades up to get him, you've got Miami at 5, you've got the Chargers at 6, and obviously any teams on the outside looking in are very much destined to move up into that top 10 to get him if he was available. But I think it comes down to Miami and the Chargers, where they're at with their quarterback situation, and more so their bridge quarterback situation. For Miami, is it Josh Rosen? Is it Ryan Fitzpatrick? For the Chargers, is it Phillip Rivers? And whatever it might be, I think moving forward and getting Tua is the direction that one of those two teams is going to go. And I think they're ultimately going to have to move up to either 3 or 4. They're going to have to jump each other and make sure that they're in position to get him, because I think it's pretty well known at this point, 1 and 2 is going to be Burrow and Young, unless something shocking happens between now and the draft. Obviously, we've got months to go, but I think it's going to be that in that order. So that's where I'm at with Tua. As far as the other two, Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs. Yes, I've got Jerry Jeudy ranked higher on my board. I do like him as a wide receiver 2. He's wide receiver 2 for me. CeeDee Lamb is wide receiver 1, folks. Just saying. But it's close. I mean, it's very close. And that's something, too. It's like with wide receivers in this draft, especially 1, 2, and 3, because I think collectively it's, Jeudy, Lamb, Ruggs, or however you would put it in order. It's very, very tight. But it's very similar in a sense to like, how do we draft the top, or how do we rank the top 4 running backs in Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins? And if you want to throw in Eno Benjamin or Zach Moss, whatever it might be, how do you rank that top 5? It's a very good group, and it's a very talented group. And maybe it's just tier 1 is these 3 or 4 guys. Tier 2 is these 3 or 4 guys. But with Jeudy, Ruggs, and Lamb, it's ridiculous how talented these guys are. And with Jeudy and Ruggs, I like what you said with the concentration drops on Jeudy. And that's really why he's not my top-ranked receiver, because the releases, what he can do, at the stems of his routes, it's pretty incredible. And his ability to make that big play, it can happen. But it's also with Henry Ruggs, too. He's got that athletic ability, that breakaway speed literally at the blink of an eye, he is 10 yards in front of a defensive back because of that speed and that ability to separate like that. And I love that you talked about comeback routes and hitch routes from him. It's that like sudden twitch in his routes that makes him so effective when running them, that I think it's going to be a big difference maker for him at the next level, because you really don't know, because he's going to sell vertical and he's got that speed, but with that little twitch on that stem to come back or hit that hitch route, it's going to be lights out for him. So my question now is, well, yes, we expected all three of them to be. Where do we go from here as far as who is going to be the first receiver taken between the two? Because me personally, I think it's going to be Henry Ruggs. I think he's going to get drafted before Jerry Jeudy.
I have a feeling too. Now, trying to figure out and pencil him in where he's going to go, I think is one of the more difficult parts, because, you look at Cincinnati, like you said, Burrow, Washington, going with Chase Young, Detroit, probably looking at the defensive line, or Jeffrey Okudah of Ohio State. The Giants could be an opportunity. I still think Ruggs at 4 is super high.
Yes.
I think probably 4 is kind of high for any of these guys. I think you can definitely justify it. I don't even know what is Darius Slayton wide receiver 1 right now for Daniel Jones. I mean, you have to build around the quarterback. And just based on when you're talking pre-show, talking about Dave Gettleman's comments, it's most likely that they're going to take an offensive tackle, whether that be Andrew Thomas here, Jedrick Wills takes that big step forward, or Tristan Wirfs of whenever he decides to declare. If he does, out of Iowa, I think that would be a spot too. Miami, you're looking at quarterback position. We talked about Tua. The Chargers, we've also talked about quarterback. I think they're okay on receivers. It depends on the direction of Keenan Allen. But Mike Williams has really blossomed into a wide receiver 1 type of player. Carolina, they invested in DJ Moore a couple years ago. I don't know if they want to go forward with that. They're still looking at, evaluating the quarterback situation. Maybe Arizona's the team that kind of just opens it up. Christian Kirk, battled some injuries a year ago, is still kind of looking to be that wide receiver 1. Can he be? Somebody needs to take over for Larry Fitzgerald. So maybe Arizona, just with what they have at stake at quarterback, could be the team that pulls the trigger. I still think Jacksonville, maybe they need a couple of other receivers to complement DJ Chark. And then Cleveland, they have a very strong wide receiver room right now, but who knows how many are going to be retained after the season, this offseason. So I think Arizona may start the wave, and it's probably one of these Alabama receivers, but I definitely think CeeDee Lamb justifies that. So I'm going to say 8 for Arizona is probably the first wide receiver taken.
Well, and you got to think, and you got to think too, is like, at 8, if there's any receiver available, whoever it is, I mean, you would have to think CeeDee Lamb is up there just simply because of that rapport with Kyler.
I didn't even think about that. That makes total sense. Okay, that's it. CeeDee Lamb at 8 to Arizona.
Yeah, that's a lock, Sharpie. Okay.
Yep,
but I will say I do like Henry Ruggs because he's got the ability, and I'm not saying CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy don't, but he's got that ability to play outside in the slot. You have a guy in Akeem Butler. You have Andy Isabella. You have Christian Kirk. You have those 3 guys. You add this 4th guy, plus you have Keyshawn Johnson from Fresno State. That's your 5 receivers if Larry Fitzgerald retires or whatever. And even if you have him, I mean, you have to remember, Arizona ran empty sets more than any team in the NFL this past year, so they like to utilize wide receivers. Then sure, they're going to have Kenyon Drake and David Johnson. Maybe they don't have David Johnson. Maybe they move on from him because it seemed like Kenyon Drake was a perfect fit for them, what they missed in the run game. But we'll see. But Henry Ruggs, I think, is interesting there, and I think really it comes up to CeeDee Lamb or Henry Ruggs, not even so much Jerry Jeudy. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be a debate that we talk about all draft season. We'll certainly bring on, our other colleagues at Cover One, Brad Kelly, Zach Hicks, to talk about these receivers and what they think. It's certainly those three because, Zach has got some interesting thoughts on Jerry Jeudy. He's not as high on him. And obviously, Brad, with his wide receiver background, it would be great to just get that in-depth analysis on everything that he sees in these receivers. And, he's a great wide receiver mind. So it's going to be fun to bring all of those guys in. But that was really the big news in the last couple of days, especially from the last show to today. But there's also other players that have declared for the 2020 NFL Draft, and you've got the list. And I'm curious because I don't remember every name. I remember a couple of people that have gone back to school, Trey Smith being one of them to Tennessee, which I'm bummed about because that guy's got the juice. He has got the juice, and I was really falling in love with what I was seeing from him, and then he goes back to school. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go ahead and move all these .mp4 files and move that to 2021 now, and we'll get to that next year. But what do you got on your list?
Well, yeah, let's just start with that. The guys that declare or did not declare, I'd say declared to go back to school. You talked about Trey Smith, the offensive lineman from Tennessee. Another offensive lineman that was high on both of our boards, I believe both in the top 20 with Creed Humphrey, the center out of Oklahoma, is deciding to go back to school. Another offensive lineman, Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State, the right guard. Didn't have a ton of hype, but I still think he was a guy that definitely has a lot of hype going into next year. I think he has top 10 talent. I think him and Sewell from Oregon, I think are going to be two of the top offensive linemen for next year. But sticking with the offensive line theme, Samuel Cosby out of Texas started out the season really strong at left tackle, played at LSU, and I think he did a pretty decent job overall. Kind of plateaued throughout the rest of the year.
Scored a touchdown.
Yeah, big boy touchdown. But Samuel Cosby, I think, is a guy that definitely next year, with a whole season of film at starting left tackle, I think he'll have some hype. But a couple other players, you talked about the two Alabama wide receivers, Devontae Smith returning to Alabama, Sean Wade, the corner out of Ohio State, returning to school, and then Richard LeCount, the safety out of Georgia. So most of those guys that I just listed, had top 40, top 50 type buzz. Does any of them outside of Trey Smith and maybe Creed Humphrey surprise you that they're returning to school?
I would say Sean Wade. That was the one that really shocked me because he was getting a lot of buzz and really his tape justified it, and it kind of showed when they played Clemson. He laid that hit down on Trevor Lawrence, and that changed the whole complexion of that game. The game completely changed from that point on. He was taken out of the game, got ejected, and Clemson was able to do certain things, and they started picking on the corner that came in. I can't remember his name, but he the corner that came in to fill in for Sean Wade, they started picking on him. They started throwing his way. They ran his way more. And it even got Jeffrey Okudah exposed at times where he missed a couple of tackles, and it showed on tape. And I think when you look at Sean Wade, he's now putting himself in position to really show a full year as a true number one corner, not so much a nickel, more so as a CB1. And I think he could solidify himself and maybe put himself in that top 2, top 3 cornerback conversation for next year. So that was one that really surprised me. And then the Creed Humphrey one, obviously, that one surprised me a little bit too, because I thought maybe he had done enough, especially from his first year at Oklahoma. I thought he did enough to really solidify himself and put himself in that conversation as the top center and maybe even jump Tyler Biadasz, who I think had a good year, but other people are starting to question, maybe he's very scheme dependent and things like that. But I think he's a hell of a football player, and I think he's just a good football player regardless of scheme. So I still am very high on Tyler Biadasz, but I think it certainly helps him that guys like Davis and Humphrey and Smith went back to school, because now he's got that interior offensive line label as maybe the top interior offensive lineman. Yeah. Maybe a guy like Nick Harris gives him a little push. I doubt that. Maybe the player I was watching from Arizona, oh my God, why is his name totally slipping my mind? I'll find it, but go ahead on to the next of your list.
It's funny, speaking of Tyler Biadasz, you're taught to grade the player, not the helmet. Mm-hmm. But can we grade the helmet on this and just say he's a Wisconsin lineman and just go on from there? Because I feel like he just has that grit and grind. He's the center. He's the signal caller in that offense. And sure, he may be scheme dependent, but the guy, he showed no major flaws for me to be like, oh, he's not going to make it in the NFL because of this.
Well, and furthermore,
go ahead.
Oh yeah, and furthermore, I mean, you mean to tell me that teams in the NFL don't run that scheme? I mean, come on. I mean, there's going to be plenty of teams in the first round that look at him and say, you know what, he fits our scheme. He fits what we're looking for. We have a need there. We might not play him at center, but we could play him at guard, whether he's got short arms or not, or we could play him at center and move our center to guard, whatever it might be. The other two names too, Shane Lemieux from Oregon could push in that top interior offensive line. And the guy I was talking about from Arizona, Cody Creason, right guard 76. Nice player. I think you'd like him. So as you were. Proceed.
Yeah, and it's funny, just piggybacking off what you said about Biotis, it's if a team's going to go that high in drafting, not necessarily an interior offensive lineman, but let's just say strictly he's a center, and his range is probably in the 25 to 40 range, you better believe it. They're going to make sure that their scheme plays very similarly to that Wisconsin did, or they feel very comfortable. Because you can't tell me that Frank Ragnow wasn't the right fit, or whoever else, the interior lineman that had been drafted in that back part of the line. You can't tell me that they're just going to draft a center and be like, oh, he's a good center, we'll just go forward there. They've definitely done the research. Yeah, Gary Bradbury. Yeah, for sure.
He was, in my opinion, very scheme dependent. They ran a crap ton of zone. I was going to say a different word, but I went with crap. They ran a crazy amount of that at North Carolina State. And if you don't believe me, go watch my film breakdowns on Ryan Finley. That's the house I built, and it's the house I'm going to die and burn in because he's not very good in the NFL. But anyways, I'm ranting now. Go ahead as you were on your list.
We talked about Jedrick Wills was another Alabama player. Xavier McKinney, another Alabama player, the safety. Willie Gay, linebacker out of Mississippi State. I'm going to have to dig a little deeper going forward with him. Quintez Cephas, the wide receiver from Wisconsin, had some interesting background issues, but got reinstated. I think he was dismissed, but got reinstated to the team. Really showed out, had a pretty solid Rose Bowl game. So I think he's definitely somebody to dive in, and just another name to add to a very stacked wide receiver core. Geno Stone, safety out of Iowa. The reason I'm highlighting him is, hey, it's not the Iowa football program that's holding back on these draft declaration. It is A.J. Epinez and Tristan Wirfs, two guys that have top 15, top 20 hype, but have yet to make that announcement. And again, that's their personal thing. Some people want different things in college, but they have a lot of money right in front of them, so we're still awaiting their declaration. Antoine Winfield Jr., safety out of Minnesota, had a ton of interceptions this year. Definitely somebody to really look forward into a safety class that's interesting. I'll just say that much. And then Kendrick Rogers, a guy that you've really liked from Texas A&M. I'm still interested to see where his draft stock lies, if he's a day 2 guy or probably an early day 3 guy. And then 2 quarterbacks that I'll end on, and you can piggyback off of any of the guys I listed. Cole McDonald, quarterback out of Hawaii, and then Jake Fromm, the quarterback out of Georgia. Jake Fromm, maybe not necessarily that surprising, but Cole McDonald, who had, I'll say a lot of Twitter hype. I'll go with that. I'll be comfortable. Say a lot of Twitter hype coming into the year. Didn't have the season that you would have expected. But Jake Fromm, not necessarily that surprising. Kind of probably a consensus top 5 quarterback, but there's still a lot of major concerns going forward if he really is going to be a successful NFL quarterback.
Yeah, Jake Fromm, more of like that game manager type of guy. He's not, he's not going to hit the deep ball. Like, yeah, he can make a deep throw here and there. And when I watch him, I get like that feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm watching Ryan Finley 2.0 or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like one of those things where I'm like, don't do it, Russ. Don't fall for this guy because he manages the game well. He doesn't really have elite traits. Maybe you could say, leadership, his composure, how poised he is. You could say that about him, but it's not. I just don't know if that's going to carry over for him to be like QB1 or QB3. I think he's more of, like you said, a top 5, top 6 quarterback. Cole McDonald, he's a fun watch. I think he's a fun developmental quarterback. I don't think anybody's going to take him and say year 1 or year 2, this is our guy. But maybe a team like the Chargers, maybe they miss out on Tua. They don't want to take Herbert in round 1. And maybe on early day 3, they fall in love with Cole McDonald and say, hey, this guy would fit our offense to have him learn behind a Phillip Rivers, an aging veteran or something like that. But You went through a ton of names. Another name I'll add to it because I heard it on my drive home today, Cody White, wide receiver out of Michigan State. He declared for the draft, which let me just say, as our resident Spartan, as I wear an actual Michigan State hoodie right now, what a bonehead move, because this is a deep class and he has no business being drafted in it. No offense to him, but he had a ton of drops this year. He's not a great route runner. He has the athletic ability. He's got some versatility in and out of the slot, but overall, no business being in this draft. And maybe some people will fall in love with him, but I think he's way in over his head. I think he got bad advice on this, and I think it's very similar to the LJ Scott thing where he went pro chasing the dollar, and I think Cody White's doing the same thing. No disrespect to him, Mr. Football in the state of Michigan, highly touted recruit out of Walled Lake Western, a very good school. He's a good young man. I'm not discrediting him there, but overall, I think you're making a big mistake not coming back to Michigan State for your senior year, especially in this wide receiver class, which could be the deepest we've seen maybe ever. And I just think he's making a very, very bold move. But you mentioned a couple names early on, Xavier McKinney, safety out of Alabama. I really like him. I don't want to say I love him, but I really like him. I think him and Grant Delpit, like the way I felt about Devin White and Devin Bush last year, of how it was really like almost 1A, 1B, and I ultimately went with Devin Bush. I think right here is it's going to be the same thing, 1A, 1B. I think they're going to be very close in the rankings when we get into the teens, like between 12 and 18 or something. I think it's going to be very close for those two on the board. And maybe I'm way in over my head. Maybe Xavier McKinney's not that good, but I think he is. I love his aggressiveness, and I like that ability that he brings to play in the box too. So maybe I'm wrong there, but love the list of names that you had there, because that was a ton of stuff right there.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some that I missed too, but just based on the last time we talked here on the podcast, I believe that's everybody. If not, there may have been a couple names out there that I left off. But going back to White, like you were saying with Michigan State, there's always a few guys that you just kind of scratch your head at. You wish them the best. Sometimes, they have that undrafted free agent and they make a name for themselves. But still, just with the opportunity in front of him, his is a little thinner than it is compared to some other people, regardless of position. So it definitely does make you scratch your head, but that's just one of many that have already announced that have made some interesting decisions, but also I'm sure there's still plenty more to come. The deadline is January 17th. So a week from today, we should have the final list. I guess technically, I think it's either a couple days after, Sunday or Monday, the NFL will release the official underclassmen list. But yeah, a week from today, we'll have everybody's declaration as far as underclassmen go.
Oh, it's going to be great. We'll have that. We'll have the Senior Bowl. It's going to be awesome. Football is great. Life is good. Things are pointing up, folks, even if I went on a Ryan Finley rant earlier. But yeah, with the Cody White thing though, too, just to follow up on it, and then I'll bring in one more name on the list, then we'll get to Clemson, LSU. But yeah, with that, I mean, it's like, even if he was a UDFA, it doesn't really matter. I mean, like he's not Jacoby Myers as a route runner, he doesn't have like a trait that really stands out. Like, okay, maybe he's versatile. Maybe you could use him on those, type little, those little trick plays where you run a jet sweep and then he stops and throws it down the field or something like that. But overall, like, I just don't see where he separates himself from really anybody in this class. I could think of probably 20 different names that I would put in front of him at this point. And I mean, that's just off the top of my head. And it's just like, I can't imagine or fathom this guy being drafted. And if he is drafted, it's gotta be round 7 at this point. I mean, it's asinine. But the other name that stood out on the list too was Antoine Winfield Jr., because he's just a baller. He is a baller. He's a ball hawk. He's got all the talent in the world, and he could be a big riser too. And maybe he puts himself in that discussion for top safety, because I like Grant Delpit a lot. I really do. And he is my top safety. But I think McKinney and a guy like Winfield Jr., I think they're going to really push the needle or push the envelope, I guess, for him, or for themselves to be that top safety. So Winfield Jr. is certainly a name to circle out of Minnesota for sure.
Oh, yeah. I definitely think he has potential because I feel like, and you kind of just did, I feel like even though those top two guys, Delpit and McKinney, are probably the consensus top two, I still think you can poke some holes in their game. Like you said, with
Mm-hmm.
McKinney has, really aggressive attitude, but I think there's some consistency issues with Delpit. He's kind of hampered a little bit by injuries throughout this season. He has really good range. I think he can come downhill.
Yeah.
But still, I think there's a little consistency, whether he's fully engaged on tackling. And as a safety, of course, when you have that range, you got to be able to consistently wrap up. I think his coverage skills are fine. And I think his vision overall is fine, but I think sometimes he gets a little greedy. So if you want to make Winfield Jr. your number one safety, you definitely can make the argument. I just don't – I don't think those top guys necessarily, or the top guy is solidified without an argument. But still, there's some talent up there, a lot of potential in that safety class.
Yeah, well, and on top of it too, I mean, you could make a case for Ashton Davis out of Cal. I mean, he's got the athletic ability. He's very rangy. I mean, I think he's versatile enough where you could play him in the box. I think you could, put him as a too high safety for sure. And you might even get fortunate enough where he could be consistent enough as a single high safety. The way I feel about Ashton Davis is exactly how I felt last year at this time about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and out of Florida. And he ultimately became my top ranked safety last year. And I think he went like round two. Was it round two or maybe it was round three? I can't even remember. But
he was on the board a lot longer than we expected.
Yeah, he was on the board for a long time. And I'm not saying Ashton Davis is going to be the same, but just kind of the way I feel about him. And I feel like there's a lot of similarities between the two. I could be wrong, but I think there's a lot of similarities. And I don't think Davis is going to jump any of those guys that we're talking about, but Winfield certainly could. And with Grant Delpit, the range is unbelievable, but his ability, like the tackling inconsistencies, it's weird. It's so weird to me. And I think part of it this year was just more so with injuries over anything else, because there are times, especially like when he played Georgia Southern, he runs up, shows that range, shows that aggressive downhill mindset, and makes these odd tackles that, just athletic specimens would make. But then there's times that he just either is too high, he takes a poor angle, and I just don't know if it was being hampered with some injuries or what it is. It's just odd, but he's a playmaker for sure. So anyways, we could talk about all these guys all day, but let's get into LSU Clemson. Big game Monday. We will not talk, you and I will, but not with our audience until sometime after the game next week. But Monday night, national championship, Clemson, LSU, a Tiger football team will be a national champion on Monday. What's your take on the game? Who you got winning? Who's the player to stand out?
For the longest time, and I say pretty much all season long, after a couple weeks after that North Carolina Clemson game where Clemson had every opportunity to lose that football game, depending on the 2-point conversion by Carolina, I've been a big believer in Clemson because, one, it's almost like I took the route of, hey, everybody in quotes, is bashing Clemson. They're not a good football team. They don't play a good schedule. Well, yeah, but they're beating everybody by 35 to 40 points, and their offense is solid. Trevor Lawrence has been outstanding, and their defense is putting up better numbers as far as scoring defense goes than last year when we saw multiple guys get ripped off or go in the first round. So I lean heavy toward Clemson, and I know what LSU is capable of. I know their offense can drop pretty much 40 points at the drop of a hat. But I just feel like the experience and the leadership, even though it's young leadership at Clemson, says a lot. And I think Dabo Swinney, and I'm not saying Ed Orgeron's a bad coach, but I think Dabo Swinney has this team a little more ready to play this football game, despite some of the shortcomings against Ohio State. Because, like you were talking about the Sean Wade targeting foul against Trevor Lawrence, or the incompletion that should have been a fumble and a touchdown for Ohio State that could ultimately be us talking about LSU and Ohio State right now. But I think Clemson has that senior leader, or that upper leadership, I should say, to really kind of hit the pedal and go forward. I'm leaning more towards Clemson, one, because I've kept saying it over and over again, so now it's almost I have to stay true to my word. But still, I think it's going to be a solid game, no matter the outcome. But as far as players to watch, we've talked about it. We're going to talk about it over and over again. Game day, every NFL draft website's going to be talking about it from Monday morning until the game time. Isaiah Simmons, he's just that good. A multiple, variety type of player. He's lined up at corner, at safety, at linebacker, at like a defensive end position, put him in the flat, put him as a spy, which would be really interesting in this game because Joe Burrow has, a tremendous athleticism and can change the game just based on his legs and what breaks down on the pocket. So I think just Isaiah Simmons being that valuable on defense for Clemson is the game changer in the entirety, regardless of team in this game, because he's just that important and he's that elite at really everything that he plays. And you saw his impact versus Ohio State. You saw him playing the boundary on that incredible interception. Isaiah Simmons is definitely the guy to watch in this game. I know we've hyped up Joe Burrow, from September to now, but Isaiah Simmons almost not single-handedly holds the game in his hands, but I think he has a huge impact on what LSU does offensively because we know that team can score 40, 45 points regardless of who they're playing.
To be honest, I can't disagree with you. I feel like almost if I was in Vegas, I'd be betting on Clemson just simply because I feel like that's where you would make your money from a sports betting perspective. I haven't looked at like what the line is or the spread or anything for this game, but that's how I feel right now. But the safe bet, I think, is LSU, and that's the direction I'm going to go. I am going to pick LSU. I said it on both radio spots this week that I think that's the direction that this game's headed. I think the season is headed for the perfect season for Joe Burrow. He's going to get the Heisman. He's going to have maybe one of the best collegiate seasons ever for a quarterback in maybe the history of the game. He's going to win a national championship, and he's going to become the first overall pick. And that's just how it feels. And maybe I'm wrong. I do think, though, Clemson is going to play an incredibly good game. I think it's going to be a close game. It would not surprise me if it came down to the last drive. I think it's going to be a little high scoring. I don't disagree with you on Isaiah Simmons. I think he's going to solidify himself if he hasn't already. I think he has, but I think this is going to be a game where he could really solidify himself as a top 10 pick. But the ability of Joe Burrow makes a big difference. The ability of his receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, makes a big difference. And then obviously just their defense, I think is going to be something that, to be honest, something Trevor Lawrence and Clemson has never seen, something Travis Etienne has never seen. And while, yes, he is very explosive when he gets in the open field, he's never seen, I think, a nose tackle like Tyler Shelvin, who's 6'4", 348 or whatever it is. He's a ridiculously huge human. You've got Kayvon Chasen, a 20-year-old edge rusher who's really starting to come into his own. We've talked about Grant Delpit. They've got Christian Fulton, who we talked about last year. They've got the freshman, Derek Stingley, the corner. They've got so many players. Now, I will say one player I think that is going to stand out is for Clemson, and it's not Trevor Lawrence. It's not Justin Ross. It's not T. Higgins. It's nobody like that. I do think A.J. Terrell, the corner out of Clemson, is going to have a good football game because he's going to be matched up against receivers, like I mentioned, Chase and Jefferson, and he's going to have to be physical. He's going to have to control have control with leverage, and he's going to have to attack the catch point, and that's what he does well with. Now, he is at times, in my opinion, similar to Greedy Williams like last year, where Greedy Williams false stepped a lot. Remember, when we were watching tape together and we looked at that and we saw, oh wow, he's actually false stepping, and he's like in his going into his backpedal, he's like false stepping forward and then backpedaling. Terrell,
it looks a little unnatural.
Yeah. Terrell does that as well, but I think he could have a difference maker type of game for himself and his draft stock. I don't know if it's enough to win the football game. Maybe he solidifies the game-winning interception or something like that on the final drive, but I think people should really circle his name for the Clemson defense. So I'm really excited. I'm going to go with a score of 38-35 LSU. I don't know what you're going with.
Gosh, yeah, I think the over-under. I think it's the spread is anywhere from 3.5 to 5.5 in favor of LSU, and then the over-under is anywhere from 68 to 70. Mm-hmm. So you're pretty much right there with just a little bit over. I mean, it's hard to argue. I'm saying 35-31. I think this game definitely gets in the 30s. And I don't think that's any disrespect to the defenses because that's just kind of how these teams are. There's too much firepower in offense. I mean, if you want to say, I know Alabama has a great group of wide receivers, but you could make the case that these are the two best wide receiver units in college football.
Yep.
Teams have really solid running backs they can rely on. Both teams have the number one quarterback for this year's draft and the number one quarterback for next year's draft. So this is an offensive juggernaut type of matchup. So I definitely think the teams that if you score 30 in this game, you can pat yourself on the back, but that definitely does not mean you're winning. Maybe if you get a 4-0 on the board, you feel a little more comfortable. But I definitely think everything is on the table here offensively. But I'm with you. I like talking about just the receiver matchups and then what A.J. Terrell has to offer, because I think there's a lot of potential in this game. He has a lot of flexibility in his lower half. He's really good at the line of scrimmage as far as being patient and playing against the press. So it'll be interesting of how he lines up. Of course, those stud LSU corners against a really strong Clemson wide receiver unit. I think that's the game. We talk about winning at the line of scrimmage. Well, let's win at the line of scrimmage on the perimeter. Let's space it out just a little bit. So I think that's the matchup that a lot of scouts are going to be looking at.
Yep, I completely agree. And I know I gave like a high scoring prediction and I talked highly on the defensive side, but I think it's because both teams have that ability to score in one or two plays. And I think that's what's going to happen a few times during that game. So that's my prediction on it. So we'll see. But you guys, of course, can follow us on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, at _Christian Page. Remember to smash the follow buttons there. Remember to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, whether it's Apple Pod, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, whatever it is that you use. Be sure to find us, follow us, rate, review, subscribe, all the goods. And, of course, enjoy the football game on Monday night. Enjoy the playoff football that you get on Saturday and Sunday. Go Titans, am I right? Go Titans, right?
That's right. Tighten up. Big game. It's going to be interesting. Jayon Brown is out at linebacker, one of the more athletic linebackers Tennessee has, which, of course, stinks when you're going against the most athletic quarterback ever.
Yeah, you guys are going to get smoked. Sorry.
Probably.
But, all right, CP, thanks, my man, for joining me. For Christian Page, I'm Russell Brown. Until next time, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.